E-Man got fans. What's going on, Clarence?
Cornmeal.
Let's do it. E-Man alright. Whoa. E-Man alright. Spicy Mafia. E-Man alright. Spicy Mafia. You gotta keep it spicy. If you see a queen, you better wife it. While we lit her than a lighter, it makes things much brighter. So you gotta keep it spicy. You gotta keep it spicy.
All right, so this is really a treat. We've got a brand new project that's already rolled out a beta. Exciting stuff in the Bitcoin Cash world. And we have one of its architects. It's called Flipstarter. And we managed to track down Emergent Reasons, who's a developer that's been in Bitcoin Cash for a while. And we've never had the pleasure to actually meet. So this is our first time talking online. And it's really cool. And there's, again, a lot of exciting stuff happening with crowdfunding. But before we get way deep into that, first off, Emergent, thanks so much for coming on, man. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. I've got a little bit of a cold, so you'll have to deal with my voice. But thanks for having me on, and thanks for all the reporting and journalism that you guys do as well.
Tell us a little bit about kind of your background, maybe how you got into Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, and some of the projects you've been involved in prior to Flipstarter.
Oh, okay, yes, sure. So I'm one of those guys, right? I'm pseudo-anonymous, so I have my own whole life going on in the background that doesn't really have anything at all to do with crypto. There's a pretty bright line between them. But in crypto, yeah, I got into Bitcoin. But later I started to realize that is actually a really important project, right? Bitcoin is a very important thing that needs to grow up and develop into a global system. So when I realized that that's not just going to happen accidentally or just automatically, so then I started to get more involved around 2017, 2018. And I started to ask around for projects I could help with, something I could touch on or just, jump in and help out. So that's where I got started with Bitcoin. And now with Flipstarter, does that answer your question about me? I'm not sure how far
it does. And so you go from, say, BTC, and then Bitcoin Cash is birthed in mid-2017. And what are some of the projects you worked on with regard to Bitcoin Cash prior to Flipstarter?
Right. Sorry. So, right, as I was saying, I got interested in actually doing something to help, because that whole split, that BTC BCH split is a big part of what helped me realize, like, none of this is going to happen automatically. It's going to be a lot of hard work and strife probably to get things working. So the projects I helped out with were anything I could find where I had some development or other skills to help out with. So there's BCHD. I did just a tiny bit of help with BCHD on so Chris Passia, he's great. He puts up issues on BCHD that are like, these are for beginners, somebody who could come in and just try something out and help out. So I just jumped on some of those and helped out with those. Then with cash accounts, cash accounts where you can have a user-friendly, human-friendly name for your addresses. So I jumped in there with Jonathan Silverblood because I thought it was a very important thing to happen, that we need some kind of, email type thing for money.
Mm-hmm.
And helped out there. So helped him develop a big test suite, a big suite of test data and everything to make sure everything works as advertised. Then, so there's the reusable addresses. I've helped just a little bit with that. Cash Shuffle, I helped out a lot with testing there, and then a little bit on the server. So Josh Ellithorpe has done the server for Cash Shuffle,
right?
And I just helped him out a little bit with that.
Yeah, I've seen
so that kind of thing, helping out
around
just helping out random places that I could find and look for something that I could contribute to. That's how I got started.
Yeah, I've kind of seen you bumping around for a while now, and you've always very kind. If I have questions or some issue comes up and I jump in and say, hey, explain this to me or whatever, you always very nice to take your time and go, here's what we're doing and so on. That gets us to present day, which is Flipstarter, but there's kind of an interesting story as to where Flipstarter kind of comes into play. And I guess without getting too much into the polemics and the debate, but there's no way of avoiding it, I think, is that back in late January, one of the mining pools, one of the most influential, suddenly proposed an infrastructure funding plan for BCH, what we call the IFP. And that sent everybody into a tizzy, and there was a kind of a dramatic, well, there has been anyway, a dramatic few weeks following it. My assumption has always been that really, even if you guys had been thinking about something like a Flipstarter, that really started you like, okay, we got to get on this. Am I right in thinking that, or totally off base?
That's pretty much exactly what happened. So I don't know if you know, there's really an ongoing, a long-standing mix of interest in this whole idea of public funding public goods, right? So Jonathan Silverblood has actually been working on it for more than a year. I don't know if you remember, there's Bitbacker, which was kind of like a funding platform. And then there was even a scam. There was like a major scam where somebody tried to start a funding platform, but it just turned out to be a scam and stole a bunch of people's money when they invested in it. Yeah, so it's been ongoing and a known thing that we're missing, right? This big gap of how to fund the projects, because a lot of the funding platforms are not friendly to crypto. So yeah, it's been there for a long time, but then exactly this, the IFP came up, and it was a big spark, right? Because we realized that whatever and whoever has been funding things up to this point, they apparently decided that things have to change,
Right.
because otherwise none of this would have come up, right? So yeah, it was a big spark that made us all realize, okay, well, now's the time we need to do something and show that there is a way to do funding in a voluntary way. And you may be surprised, I don't know, but there's actually a pretty broad range of views within the Flipstarter team on, IFP. Is it a tax? Is it not a tax? Is it allowable or is it not allowable? It's really
And
kind of been an independent issue to that.
Yeah, well, right. And I've appreciated that in how Flipstarter's rolled out. I haven't seen any polemics at all on on that project. It's just been kind of like, hey, this is an alternative. This is a way to move. But tell us a little bit about the team. It seems to be fairly star-studded, and everybody's voluntary, right? I mean, volunteering, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all voluntary, and it's a lot of people who are already interested in it anyway, I think, especially Jonathan. So Jonathan Silverblood deserves kind of far and above a great mention, because he has done so much work on this project. And even before the project started, he had already been thinking about all of these issues for a long time. So he is the real star of Flipstarter, I'd say. So he's there. So I know some people I've seen have been worried about Jonathan, like, what's going on with Jonathan? Where did he go? Is he still alive? But he's doing fine, and he's been working hard on this. And we're actually also working on something else together. And so, yeah, he's doing all right. Then there's Dager. So he worked on a lot of important projects in the history of Bitcoin, including Bitcoin Cash and also BTC. So he's been here for a long time, and is not he's not out there everywhere throwing his name around, but he's been on a lot of Project XT, and he's been on ABC. He committed the change, the 25 to 50 unconfirmed limit that changed this May. He committed that to ABC. So he's on the team. There's Sploit. I don't know if you know Sploit. He's been very important in Cash Shuffle and Cash Fusion, helping us communicate it and write. I think he may have helped some with the servers, but he writes all the stats pages where you can go and check everything out. So he's definitely interested in having some kind of public funding out there. He's done work on the servers for Flipstarter. There's Leandro. I don't know if you know Leandro, but he's a business development guy.
Very familiar names.
Yeah, so Leandro's a business development guy in Latin America, and he as a side job, which everyone loves him for, he does really good design work. Right? He does logos and in images and so forth, and he did some really good ones for Flipstarter, and also helped with thinking through the strategy and so forth, because that's what he does, is business development. You name, right? So he and I, I'd say maybe that he and I were the seed of Flipstarter, because when IFP came out, personally, the two of us, not speaking officially for Flipstarter, but when IFP came out, we kind of virtually looked at each other through Telegram, and we were like, no, this isn't serious, right? This isn't happening, and nobody's going to take this serious. And then some people did take it seriously, and it kind of freaked us out that people took IFP seriously. And so for the two of us, it was kind of the beginning of, hey, we really have to do something. So yeah, there's you name and me who kind of kicked off the whole thing.
Very cool. And so that sounds about like a half dozen people, and if it also sounds like you guys are spread out all over the world, right?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's just the standard, right? You got to get used to working at whatever time everybody else works at. But
yeah.
No, there are a bunch of other people who have been in there and giving us advice and helping out. But I'd say that list that I said just now pretty much covers the ones who have put a lot of effort into it.
Very cool. So just to recap, then, we got a lot of concerned guys who've been involved in, and women, been involved in Bitcoin Cash for a while. They've got sweat equity. They have street cred. They get a little unnerved, to put it mildly, by the IFP, or at least they think something needs to be done to offer an alternative. And for all the criticisms of the IFP, I will give it this: it has lit a fire under what seemed to be just kind of a salon or a parlor debate that seemed to go nowhere for a long time. So that's at least a good aspect of it.
Some good potential outcomes. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So then that leads you guys to think of creative ways to try to crowdfund. And the problem, there's so many that critics of the IFP attack it on. There's just, a bunch of ways to sort of hit it. But at least one of the key problems was that it was considered to be rather coercive, in that it kind of sort of all or nothing redirected block rewards. And for critics, again, it was sort of seen as, either sometimes they call it a tax, or they just see it as sort of like anti-Bitcoin, in the sense that it's not voluntary. Now, to steel man the other side a little bit, they would say, obviously, miners are voluntary and pools and so on and so forth. But the point being that sort of the people who are attracted to the Flipstarter idea is to try to create an alternative that sort of stays within the ethos of what Bitcoin has always been, which is, kind of people seeing a project, judging it on its merits, and funding it if they want to, making a choice. So you don't have to choose the entirety of Bitcoin to decide, as to whether or not you're going to fund something that might help it. But the challenge has been, as far as I'm able to understand it, that it always involves a trusted third party at some point, a foundation, some sort of group that has to, monitor and distribute funds. And that was sort of kind of the main bugaboo, right? That you needed you kind of needed a trusted, almost a fragile, almost like an attack vector, really, to actually get any sort of sustainable funding for any project going. Am I kind of framing this right?
Yeah, I'd say that you're like opening up Pandora's box right now, and I'm gonna try to politely close it back because maybe I'm too far on the extreme end. I'm not sure, but I don't think so. But I'll just summarize it that the method of distribution of the IFP is immaterial. from my perspective. It doesn't matter
Oh,
if it's
okay.
a Hong Kong corporation. It doesn't
Got it.
matter if it's a whitelist. It doesn't matter what. From my perspective, right? I'm not speaking for Flipstarter here. And that it's simply the act of setting up a feedback mechanism where money is taken and money is provided with some sort of algorithmic or human process that is going to set up skewed incentives that we are going to regret forever. And that it's basically going to, the way I say it, it's going to inject the government into Bitcoin Cash. And it's fundamentally opposed to permissionlessness, which I see as the core differentiator of Bitcoin Cash from anything else. There's not any other projects I'm aware of that really have achieved and survived and kept alive the permissionless aspect so that it's plausible that it'll survive the next 10 years. All the other projects I know are set up so that they work relatively smoothly in the way that the IFP would probably do. It would turn things into smooth and easier, and then it would die because we can't compete with digital fiat, because digital fiat can do fast and cheap way better than anybody else can. And what we do have is permissionlessness. So, but yeah, I'm gonna try to close that box back up because that's all my personal.
No. You actually you did great, because I inarticulately framed it, but I was trying to say what you were saying, but you just did it better. So
okay.
that the IFP basically. So let's give the IFP people, the pro IFP people, I guess. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt and say, here, they're trying to solve infrastructure funding issues, which this is actually controversial to say too, which is that most people believe that there's an issue, that it needs to be funded, but I can't really say that with a whole bunch of confidence, but let me get away with it for now. So people believe that infrastructure should be funded, and that's a problem in BCH. So it needs some sort of funding, but that the IFP basically created more problems that it solved. So now Flipstarter and the IFP aren't related necessarily, but the IFP tries to I'm sorry, let's try that again. The Flipstarter tries to solve where the IFP went wrong, right? Is that okay?
I'd say that that's a pretty fair statement. And also it has been, like I was saying, an ongoing thing that's just been a big gap. And this is an opportunity to fill it. And so it's replacing that idea, or maybe just doing what we should have done all along, really, is one of the ways I see it. Except, in Bitcoin, there's a million things to do, and it's just a matter of prioritizing them. And this 12D chess or whatever definitely bumped up the priority of voluntary funding mechanisms.
Okay.
And I'd also like to say,
say it.
I'd also like to say that the doing Flipstarter as the funding method, it's important to note that what we've been doing so far, I started to call it blind donations, because people depend on hey, I've got this donation address for our project or for me as a developer, and if you want to donate to it. And there's just a lot of problems with that. As we work and think about Flipstarter, you just start to see, wait, it just doesn't work. The incentives don't work here at all. And Bitcoin is all about incentives, right? That's what all of us should be thinking about all the time. The people who are, on the inside and trying to build it. And the incentives just don't work because, if you're in it for social credit, man, that word has been so messed up. But if you're in it for some kind of social, cred, the street cred, you don't get anything from donations, right? Unless you stand up and you're like, hey, hey guys, I don't want to brag or anything, but I just donated 10 BCH to this address, right? And that feels weird. So doing that doesn't work. Just throwing money into the hole they might use it well and you might trust them, but you don't get any credit for it. There's no incentive directly for you to do it, except that you trust that this person is going to develop something that's going to help Bitcoin Cash. But then it gets to the point of, well, what is this person going to do with the money, and what do they do with the money? What did they do with the money? So there's just all these open questions for the people, the funders, right? The people who are providing the money have all these questions. And maybe it means that, the big holders are not us builders, right? Apparently we're not the richest guys in the room because we didn't think about these issues enough up to this point. And when you start to think of it from the funder's perspective, because these kind of things, these infrastructure things need significant amount of money, right? As Omri has rightly pointed out many times, but they need significant money. And the people who can provide that money, they have their own incentives, and we need to think about those. And so that's one thing that Flipstarter is trying to do very carefully, is encourage anybody that makes a campaign to say, hey, this is what I need. This is why I need it. This is how we're going to spend it. This is how we're going to be accountable for spending it. This is how you can see how we spend it, the transparency. And if you want to put your name on the funding, then you can get some credit for it too. So we're looking at trying to set up those incentives for the funders themselves, not just for the projects.
Nice. And so let's get into the weeds just a little bit here. We have a very savvy audience, but I still don't want to spend too much time on the mechanics, but I think they're important. How is Flipstarter different?
Right. Well, one thing is we won't kick you off the platform for putting Bitcoin in the title of your project, right? Which is what will happen on most of the other platforms.
Right.
That's a big one. Because otherwise, and this is actually not a glib point, this is a really important point, because otherwise I would actually say, hey, BCHD or Bitcoin Cash Node or ABC, just go on Kickstarter and do it.
That was my question.
Go
right. That was my question.
on Patreon and use it now, because the problem is we need funding, and it'll be awesome if we can do it with Bitcoin Cash, and it should be done that way eventually. But if the real problem is that any given node or any given project says I need money, that's the real problem to solve, right? But that doesn't work very well with the existing platforms because they will kick you off. So we got to do something else. So how it works, what's different from those is with Flipstarter, this is a very controversial point, that our name Flipstarter, right, obviously suggests Kickstarter.
Right.
And what that suggests to people is that it's a platform where you can come on and you can make a campaign and you can show it to everybody and you can share it with your friends. And that is not what Flipstarter is doing. And I know that has disappointed some people, but we've tried to communicate this as clearly as possible from the very beginning. And I think maybe the name was just kind of a bit of a mismatch. But what we are doing is providing open source technology and a technique and even a whole website that you can spin up by yourself so that anyone can run a campaign anywhere for anything, right? This is like you were saying, the Bitcoin Cash ethos. It's permissionless. And that is the way we framed this whole thing from the beginning, is that for a platform, that's a good fit for a company. You need a company really, or a nonprofit or something like that to run an ongoing concern where you have server costs and security and customer support and all that kind of thing, right? And that is absolutely what you would end up having if you're running a platform. So that's not what we're doing. We're providing the technology that a platform will be able to use to run, and that any platform could use to run it in a way that works with Bitcoin Cash. So that's one difference. There's another one, which is actual technology. But does that first part make sense?
It really does, and I'm glad you clarified it, because I think that's a big, at least initial stumbling block. I don't think it will be ultimately, but in the beginning, just like you say, I think people were sort of thinking, this is a Kickstarter, or this is, I can't think of the other platform right now, but there's like 3 or 4 others, crowdsourcing platform. I just go up there, I use their website. But that if it were to be the case, that introduces doors you can kick in. That introduces trust. So you're trying to sort of give the permissionless aspect, like you're taking that all the way, right?
Well, it's a mix. One is, yes, we absolutely do want it to be permissionless, where it's all open source. And as long as you can figure out a way to run a website, right? Like you can pay $10 a month for a server, then you can do one of these. And you might need some help from a web dev. So that is an important aspect. But then the other is just practical. Like, yeah, we'd kind of like to run a Kickstarter, right? But that takes a lot of money and investment and ongoing work to do. And that's not really compatible with a completely voluntary team like we are. And so at the very beginning, I set that scope and I said, it would be really cool if we could run a platform, but we're not going to do that because how many of you have a full-time job? Like everybody in the room raise their hand. Yeah, it's not going to work. So yeah, we set that scope at the beginning to separate this. So it's half practical and half kind of ideological, but yeah, there's both aspects to it.
And so take us through, where the money goes, how it's collected and so on.
Yeah, it's really cool. So there's actually multiple ways to do this, but the key, I guess I'd say technology in quotes, is the assurance contracts. I call them assurance payments because they're not smart contracts. It's just an idea that when you have something that needs to be done and one person either can't or is not going to pay for the whole thing, which is kind of the definition of big public goods and infrastructure, right? When you have one of these things and you throw $100,000 into it and then nobody else does, and you don't get your $100,000 back, it's like, oh man, So that's the idea of the assurance payments, is that you set an amount of $1 million or whatever amount, and until there's enough pledges to reach $1 million, nothing happens. And the way that has worked traditionally is with some kind of escrow agent or some kind of trusted party who's going to hold the money, or just trust, like, hey, I say I'm going to pay money, right? But that's not how hard money works. That's not how Bitcoin works. So what we did is we used actually the technology that Mike Hearn used years and years ago in Lighthouse. If anybody wants to research, that's a whole thing to read up on, is Lighthouse. But we're using the same technology where we can trustlessly, collect all these payments. And then if we reach the target, the whole thing goes through. And if we don't reach the target, nothing ever happens to your money and you're fully in control of it. So that's the thing that we chose to do, is these assurance payments. The technique we chose to do it is that what's called an anyone can pay transaction. And that's one way to do it. And I can explain a little bit about that. But then there's other ways to do it, right? With smart contracts. And that's probably the better way eventually. But the fastest path from A to something that works was to use this technology from Lighthouse, to use the anyone can pay transaction.
And
the way that works?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the way that works is the idea is very simple. Usually when you sign a transaction, it takes your input coins and you say, this is the output, and your input coins are exactly enough to cover that transaction. So it's just done. You say, here's my inputs, here's my outputs, and you sign that transaction and you're done. But there's another thing that's been built into Bitcoin since 2009, maybe since the first Satoshi release, I'm not sure. And that's the anyone can pay transaction, where you don't sign the whole thing. All you do is you sign the output and you sign your input. And you say anyone can pay. So it says, here's the output and it's $1 million. Here's my input and it's $5. And the network will reject that transaction. And it's like, no, you can't pay $5 and then output $1 million. That doesn't work. But you said anyone can pay. That's the way you signed it. So I can go and collect, 1,000 of these, where somebody says the output is $1 million, my input is $5, my input is $100, my input is $10,000. And we collect all these, and then the network will take all those and say, okay, yeah, that's valid. So we have all of these together that make $1 million. It's good. That's the basic technology of anyone can pay.
Very, very slick. And so this goes from theory, This goes from taking energy that was maybe first generated through outrage, but has been a long-standing kind of problem. And then you guys actually, put it into the real world. So I think it's about a month old, if memory serves, as far as becoming public. You launch it, you make some announcements about 6 campaigns and ways that you're going to begin, and you start with EPCH. So take us through kind of, because that project just sort of finished and was successful, and I really want to sort of delve into that a little bit. So take us into how you get to EPCH and all that good stuff.
Yeah, sure. So with it actually started on the very end of January. We had our Telegram. I went and looked it up on Telegram. It was like the 27th, like a couple of days after original IFP announcement. And we set a target, a tight scope and a target. We said by the end of February, we're going to do an EPCH campaign. We were pretty close. We finished it by the second week of March. So we were a little bit late, but not bad for about a month of development. I think it was pretty good. But yeah, EPCH was chosen because, it's obvious, right? They're doing very good things. They're trusted people. They're already known. So we can kind of remove the aspect of, do I want to donate to this project? Do I want to support this project? That's a relatively safe thing. So we wanted to remove that part of the that variable from the picture and just say the only difficulty is this pain in the ass technique that we set up with the plugin that you have to use. So we tried to minimize it to that. And so they were very cooperative, and they were like, yeah, sure, let's do it. Can we do it for like $1 million? It's like, no, sorry. not for the first one. We're not even sure this is going to work. So we gotta, keep it limited at first. So we set up this limited thing, and it worked. So everything worked very well. They basically had no problems. People announced, we have this Telegram room where some people are interested, and they said they had one problem or another, but really there was nothing serious about it at all, and it just went through way faster than we expected. So we funded a month of EPCH in about 11 hours, I think it was.
Yeah, yep.
Which was super great for us because, right, we're doing it. There was this plugin, and when we tried to communicate that having to use the plugin is not a great user experience at all, but it worked, and we funded it. So we were very, very happy about that.
Very cool. So EPCH, and I can't imagine there's anybody in our audience who doesn't know, but they've been around for about 2 years. They have 2 principal focus at this point in South Sudan and Venezuela, and they literally bring food to the people who need it the most, and in 2 diametrically opposed parts of the world. So it's a fantastic group, and they do great work, and a real nice use case for Bitcoin Cash, and it turns out to be a real, I guess, proof of concept, for lack of a better phrase, for Flipstarter. So that was very important that you guys roll it out, that we see it working. Take us through just a couple of the problems. There's a frequently asked questions that people can go to and so on. But take us through some of the things that you learned. Like you're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. I saw something in the chat about a slider or something, and some other things. But I wanted to ask you here on the podcast here. What did you learn from the campaign, like going forward? Because you have some other ambitious goals. This was just sort of the start of it. What'd you learn from the EPCH beta?
Right. So a lot of what we learned was just basic, web application type things. They're not very special. I don't want a slider. I want a box where I can type the number in, that kind of thing. So there was some, feedback on that level of things. The technology itself worked flawlessly, thanks to Jonathan. Mostly Jonathan, also Sploit helped with that, and Dager, who wrote the plugin. So yeah, the technology just worked, and it was great. The things that we learned, though, I mean, so there's some limitations and to this technique of doing things the way that we're doing them. And in this case, where we did things with, let's say, $5,000, about like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you have $5,000 target and you have a limit due to Bitcoin Cash protocol rules and standardness rules, you can only have a transaction of a certain size, which limits the number of people who can make a pledge. So if you say you have 500, right? Let's say you have a limit of 500. That's about correct. Then that means your minimum contribution is $10, which is kind of high.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit high, right? So that's something we learned is a pretty significant issue, that we have to deal with these limitations that don't exist when you don't care and you're just collecting money, like
Right.
on Kickstarter or Patreon or whatever. So that's something that we have to work on. Like, for example, maybe we're going to change it to use tiers instead of just random setting an amount. We'll accept 100, we'll accept 100 $1 pledges, and 10 $50 and 3 $500, that kind of thing. So we're going to have to work harder to figure out the user experience. But that becomes really important if you're going to go to the scale of the infrastructure project we're talking about, right?
That's
For $1 million project. Yeah, if you're doing a $5 million project, then what? The minimum input is $50,000, or $100,000. That's right. How does that work?
Yeah.
So, and you know what? That actually reflects the reality of, did I say $100,000? Sorry, $1,000. It reflects the reality of that it takes a lot of money to fund these things, and small donations are nice and helpful and good and important from an alignment perspective, getting everybody online and everybody's invested in it. That is really important. But when it comes to crossing that line of $1 million or whatever, it really takes serious money to do it. And that's one of the things that we have to figure out as well. And that's one of the things that we're going to test next, right? We're going to run these campaigns and see how it really goes, if we can get the big holders to actually get involved and step in and make pledges.
So what is next? I saw 500K, 6 campaigns. So what's that about?
Yeah, so that was maybe not the best framing of it. The 500K is just our idea of, hey, let's do something significant. And the EPCH is super important, but we very specifically limited it to a small number.
To 20, right?
We're pretty confident we could hit, right? 20 BCH, yeah. That was actually 10 a month ago. Now it's 20. But yeah, so that was one thing, to see that it works. But next is, yes, to see if we can hit a really significant money amount and fund these projects so that they can do important public works for Bitcoin Cash. So that is what's next. So I've made a public invitation to the node teams, and I've said, this is what we hope to get from you. And obviously there's no obligation whatsoever. And if you want to participate, then we will do the complication of running this site for you. Because like I was saying, right, it's actually running separate sites because there is no platform. So we're going to run 6 separate sites that just look like one site. And so we're going to run that for them. And if they will provide us the information, we will publish their campaign and make it available to everybody on a central location so that everybody knows where to go and what to look for, and see if we can hit some numbers. So now it comes down to a conversation with the node teams and trying to convince them that they might like to try this and what kind of things will probably help to get them funded.
And you have a timeline for this, right? I've seen a couple of different dates, one in April, one in early May.
Yeah. We'd like to start in first week of April and finish within about a month. And I mean, right, the timing there is kind of a symbolic But it's also, again, it's a symbolic thing related to IFP, and it's also a practical thing that pretty much the people involved here, not all of them, but several of us have kind of dropped everything else that we were working on to get this done. And we need to get back to our other business, right? So yeah, there's that aspect that we want to get it started. We want to get it done. We want to test this idea, see if it works, find out what works, what doesn't work, and then get back to the other things that we have to do and work on this on a voluntary basis. And in the best case, hand off the technology to people who are very good at making sites and social network sites and, you know, socially interactive things, and provide this technology to them and have them develop a real platform. That's what I'm really hoping to accomplish.
Very, very, very cool. Well, wow. That is a lot to digest. I think we're all going to be watching just intently. Congratulations on doing a fantastic job with raising money for EPCH. You guys should be very, very proud. That's some fantastic work, and super excited to kind of see what happens and how it rolls out. Before I let you go, though, how can people follow Flipstarter, your work, and kind of keep abreast of all the stuff that's coming up in the next couple months here?
Yeah. So it would be great if people can come check it out, try things out with us, and, you know, spread the word, because like I was saying, we need people to try it. And if we're gonna, you know, I went into the Telegram no tax room. There's a no tax room, and I went in there and I was like, hey everybody, it's your chance to put your money where your mouth is. Come on. come make a pledge. So yeah. So please, there's on Twitter, there's a flipstarter.cash account, and that has links to everything that's important from there. There's a Telegram. The room is just called Flipstarter. So come on Telegram and search for Flipstarter. You'll find us there. There's a bunch of people talking in there. We have Read Cash. So at read.cash/@Flipstarter. We have a bunch of articles that we've posted there in English and in Chinese, because we're trying to engage the Chinese community as well.
Forgot to ask about that. Why? I mean, obviously there's, I guess, obvious reasons, but why is the Chinese community so important?
So when you look at the IFP and the fact that the person who proposed it was, I think it's fair to say, shocked at the response. They shouldn't have been shocked at the response, right? It just reveals a huge lack of communication. And as much as we like to think that miners and pools are, and that's really important to separate those, and we need to do a better job of it. But as much as we want to think that miners and pools are like, you know, kind of these very powerful, godlike figures, they're just people. And there's been a lot of miscommunication, a lot of misunderstanding, lack of information going back and forth between these two very big communities, right? The Chinese community and the English speaking community. And so we're just attempting to do our part to bridge that gap and make sure that communication kind of gets bootstrapped along with this project.
That was a clunky way to go. Let's go back one more time. See, if you were dealing with a real professional podcaster, he would have had all this ahead of time. But in any case, let's go back again to how people can follow you. So we've got read.cash /@Flipstarter. We've got...
Yeah, that's right. So Twitter at flipstarter.cash. That one has the .cash at the end on Twitter. And then there's read.cash at Flipstarter, Twitter, Telegram. Just search for Flipstarter on Telegram and you'll find our public room. And come in there and we can talk about anything if you have problems or you want to try it. And there's links in there in the Flipstarter room where you can go and do a test. So we're continuously running a test campaign, and then every time it gets fulfilled, we just reset it. And so anybody can come in there and try it out anytime, which I really recommend and request that people do, because we need people to try it and we need people who know how it works, so that when somebody is interested and you have somebody that you know who wants to contribute, you know, there'll be people available to help them out. So yeah, please, everybody who's listening, please come on the Telegram and try it out.
The great emergent reasons. We are so honored to have had you. I told him half an hour, and I kept him way past that. So thanks so much again for coming on, dude. Fantastic work. We're rooting for you, and all the best.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Kelso. Take care.